Viewer discretion advised. Podcast may include graphic content, violence, substance use, and foul language. I recite the stories in this show as they are written to the word, with the only exception being if grammatical errors need corrected. Thank you for watching.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to Scared Shitless, a podcast with your host, Donnie Giles. That's me. So, I got to cover a few things. You might notice my voice sounds differently today, and the reason for that is that I was kind of using like a deeper voice for a dramatic effect. Feedback comes to show that that voice wasn't really too favored by the people that were listening, so we're rolling in a different direction this time. I'm going to be using my different voice from here on out. I will be using other voices to kind of enact other characters in the stories that I read, but from here on out, this is the voice that you're going to be hearing. So, this is actually my third attempt of trying to record this. The first time it didn't properly save. The second time I had no audio because my mic was actually unhooked. And this is the third time. So, hopefully, we get the story perfectly right. As you can see up the top, if you're watching on YouTube, the banner, for episode 2, we are going to be reading 1999, which is a very popular creepypasta. You've probably heard it. If you haven't heard it, congratulations, you're about to hear it. And this one really ends on a cliffhanger. I find this one really scary, especially with the current world that we live in, the way the society is right now. So, a little bit of housekeeping. If you're watching YouTube, you can obviously see the big banner at the bottom of the screen. We now have the email set up for your fan stories. If you have fan stories that you want to be read after the main feature of this podcast, send them to scaredshitlesspodcast@gmail.com. But instead of the I in shitless, it's going to be a period. So if you're listening to this on Spotify, it's scared, SH, period T, LESS podcast@gmail.com. Send your stories there if they're good that we featured on the podcast, and I will give you guys credit. I'll shout you out on the podcast. So I appreciate everybody for emailing to that podcast email. If you do that, if you so choose to do so, I encourage you to do so if you have a scary experience of your own, or even if you want to write something fictional. Write something fictional. Let me know that it's fictional. If it's scary, I'll still share it. So with that out of the way, let's get into the story, guys. The year is 1999. That sentence brings me back to my senior kindergarten class when I was 5 years old, where we used to read out the date on the blackboard every single day. The year 1999 exists as a stain in my mind, however, a memory that will not go away no matter how hard I try to forget it. 1999 marked the year I lost my first tooth, my first time on a plane, and unfortunately the early loss of my childhood innocence. That one memory refuses to be wiped, and it all started with that new or old TV. At that time, Pokemon was the latest fad to hit the school. Pokemon cards, games, stickers, and the most popular, the TV show. So, of course, every time I came home from school, I would stay glued to the TV until Pokemon came on at 5. The only problem was that my dad watched the news at 5:30, and Pokemon episodes were back to back, which meant that I had to miss an episode every day, something I whined on and on about. My dad got tired of hearing me complain every day, so that must be why he went and bought another TV. My dad bought the TV and he put it in my room. Unfortunately, it was an old, small boob tube with rabbit ears, even. It also only had 20 channels available, not including the channel that Pokemon was even on. I recall I didn't care though. I was just thrilled that I had my own TV in my room. After surfing through the channels, I came to the conclusion that only Channel 2, TVO Kids, was worth watching, so I watched that for a while. It wasn't for a few months that I discovered Channel 21. One day in April, I was flipping through the channels trying to see if Pokemon was on. I pressed Channel 21 into the remote, hoping that there were more channels. And to my surprise and delight, there was. My dad was surprised too, but he let me watch it because it seemed to have kids programs on. The channel was called Keldon Local 21, and later I found out that it was indeed broadcasted from the town of Keldon, Ontario, a town very close to my city. The shows I saw on Keldon Local 21 looked poorly made. and I never understood what was going on in them half the time. However, as I grew up, every time I thought of that channel, I realized more and more how messed up the shows that were airing on the TV were, and I had to ask myself, what the fuck was I even watching? The following is a list of shows and episodes that I remember seeing on Kale Local 21. How I remember such detail even disturbs me, but I guess things stand out in your mind for a while like this. The channel only ran a few shows, probably because it was only operational between 4 p.m. and 9 p.m. April 1999. Mr. Bear's Cellar, Episode 12. A very sketchy name if you were to look at it nowadays. The show featured a guy wearing a bear mascot costume who would get a new visitor into his cellar every day. It was always a kid. The show was filmed with a camcorder, not a very good one either. The police asked me a lot of questions about this show. This episode started with Mr. Bear sitting at a table playing checkers by himself. He sat there playing for a bit until there was a knock at the door. The camera was then looking up the stairs at the door, where there was another knock. Mr. Bear climbed the stairs and opened the door to reveal two young children. One was a boy about my age, and the other was a girl who looked about 8. Mr. Bear danced in delight, and then started talking to the kids. I couldn't hear any of them that well. I remember Mr. Bear then led the kids into the cellar, which was quite dark, only lit by a small oil lamp on the table. I can't really remember that much more, except him singing a song which I couldn't hear too well either, probably because of that large bear mask blocking his face. The episode ended with him playing hide and seek, with the kids hiding in a closet, Mr. Bear counting. May 1999. Soup and Spoon. I don't even think this was a show. I think it was more of a special movie thing. All I know is I stopped watching Kale on Local 21 for a while because I thought the show was too stupid, especially since Pokemon Now came on at 4:30 and 5. I don't remember much of this, but it showed a can of soup and a spoon both attached to strings, swinging back and forth, as if someone was holding them and dangling them in front of a camera. Interestingly enough, the show was shot in the basement, which looked just like the one used in Mr. Bear's cellar. Like I said, I can't remember much. The only thing I can remember clearly is the end. The entire thing was only half an hour, and just included stuff that I found stupid, such as the spoon chasing the soup around trying to eat him. The ending showed a table and about 7 kids sitting around it, each with a bowl of soup in front of them. They were sitting and looking at the camera, but with a confused, almost frightened face. The cameraman then held a can of soup out in front of the kids and said, "Spoons ready?" And then it just stopped. July of 1999. It was summer, and I hadn't watched Channel 21 for a while, until one day when I slept over at my friend's house, and I decided to check it out again. My friend had gotten a TV in his room for his 6th birthday, so we decided to stay up very late. For us, 9:30 was very late, and watch TV. That's when I remembered Channel 21, and I brought it up to my friend. We decided to see if it was on, and to our surprise, it was. They must have changed the broadcasting time. Mr. Bear's Cellar, Episode 23. This episode was entertaining for me and my friend because it had swearing. However, now when I think of this episode, I realize something was definitely wrong when it was filmed. The episode started with the camera on its side while it was facing Mr. Bear, who was walking up the stairs of the cellar door. The camera then blacked out for a second before fading in, back upright, and facing Mr. Bear. There was also another kid talking to him, but this kid looked about 11 or 12. He was talking to Mr. Bear for a while, but I couldn't hear well, again with the crappy camcorder from earlier, until the kid started raising his voice. The kid was saying how it was late and his sister had to go home. You could also hear more voices in the background. I remember Mr. Bear clearly saying, "Get the fuck out! You're not invited!" with a deep voice muffled by the bear mask. I remember my friend and I looking at each other and laughing at the mention of the forbidden F word, but the episode got weirder. The kid began climbing the stairs and turning around saying how he was going to call the police. Mr. Bear began breaking into a run towards the kid, who started screaming and running as well. The camera then cut out, and that was the end of the episode. The channel turned to static shortly after. I didn't want to watch Channel 21 after that. In August, I grew more curious to see Mr. Bear's cellar for some reason, though. The last episode I saw of Mr. Bear was weird and had swearing, which also made me think the show was more meant for teenagers. Nonetheless, I flipped on to Channel 21 when my dad was busy. Mr. Bear's Cellar, episode 28. Apparently, this episode had been playing the entire month of August. It was studied a lot by the police. The entire episode was just Mr. Bear sitting in a chair talking to the audience.
Hello, kids. Do you want to visit my cellar? If you do, please write me a letter at this address.
The screen then switched to a white screen with multicolored letters reading the address, and that was what remained for the rest of the episode. This repeated for 5 hours every day until September came. And guess what I actually did? I sent Mr. Bear, or the sick bastard who betrayed him, a letter. I did it out of curiosity mostly. My dad was okay with it because he thought it was a legit kid show, but then again, he never saw any of what was on Channel 21. So I wrote a letter using my best writing possible. I think it just said how I wanted to meet Mr. Bear. So my dad sent the letter to the address Mr. Bear said on the show. It took about a week to get a response, which I was surprised that I did, and I still have the letter I received on August 15th, 1999. The letter read,
Dear Elliot, thank you so much for your letter. I would love to have you in my cellar. We play games, watch movies, and go fire camping in the middle of the woods. That's some weird grammar. Come to my house at,
the police cut out this address.
Kildon, Ontario, Canada. I look very forward to having fun with you. Love, Mr. Bear.
I cannot believe my dad never found this sketchy because he actually took me to the house. And that's when the police became involved. And those endless questions, those pictures of terrified kids, the woods. That brings me to why I'm writing this blog. That psycho and his friends did some fucked up shit back then. And now it seems that he's trying to get back into contact with me again. The entire police thing is coming back. This has brought 1999 back to me. Over a decade later, it is happening again. Update. November 14th, 2009. People have been emailing me asking me exactly what happened in 1999. I'll get to that. Those weird TV shows I was watching apparently were meant to attract kids to Mr. Bear's house. And what Mr. Bear did shocked the entire town. My dad actually drove me to Kildon, along with the address Mr. Bear left on the letter. The house was actually in the outskirts of the town in open farmland. I still remember that house. It looked like an older farmhouse that looked to have been built in the early 1900s. The windows were all boarded up and the house looked to be in a state of disrepair. As we walked up to the house, I remember my dad checking the address over and over again and looking at the house in disbelief. Then the door opened. I expected Mr. Bear to be at the door, but I was surprised to see a police officer emerge from the creaking doorway. The officer then began talking to my dad, while I quickly asked if that was Mr. Bear's house. The officer's face cringed slightly, and then he muttered, "Oh God," or something like that. He started talking quietly to my dad so I couldn't hear, although my dad told me to go to the car anyway. Then we just went home. My dad was quiet the whole way home, and I felt something strange had happened. My dad never told me what happened for a while. I forgot about it anyway, too. Channel 21 no longer came on, and when I asked about it, my dad would not even acknowledge its existence. I think it was about when I was 13 where I learned the truth. I remember Channel 21 one day, and I asked my dad about it. I guess finally, he decided that I should hear the truth. Kildon Local 21 was a local TV channel that ran from October 1997 to August 1999 in the Peel region of Ontario. The entire channel was made from a house in Kildon, the house that I visited, and run by a man who was not really known by anyone in town. The channel was only available to older TVs because the signal was one that could only be picked up by rabbit ears. The man created all the shows on the channel, all of which were kid shows. He was Mr. Bear, and he was the mysterious cameraman. The real reason he created the channel was more disturbing than what was originally thought. As you might have already guessed, he kidnapped the kids and held them in a cellar. But while most people thought he was a serial child molester, he really just wanted to use the kids for another purpose. The day I arrived, the man had fled his house the night before, the day before the police went in for their investigation. I wasn't the only kid who was watching. So that's the story of the 1999 creepypasta. That is a big cliffhanger for the end of that story. Really big one. I found the story super interesting, and the main reason for that being this was back in 1999. Smartphones weren't a thing. You know, the world now is really a lot different. And if somebody wanted to do something of this caliber, I think that they could really get away with doing it now, especially with YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, all the things that your kids have access to. That's what makes the story so scary to me. And the cliffhanger, what happened to those kids, man? What happened to those kids? What did he do to them? I'm like, I'm glad that they weren't, serially molested, but what did he do to those kids? Someone knows. And I think that with this story, I really like because you could delve deeper into the story, and I'll probably do that on my own time. If the police were really involved, there was an investigation. You can check this out. You can actually check the validity of the story going into the archives, seeing if this happened or not. And who knows? It might have. I always try to look for believable, true sounding stories for this podcast. And I'm always going to try to tell true stories. Of course, some are always, you're going to have some fabrications in there. And who knows what's true and what's fabricated. There are some that are blatantly obvious, and then there are some where they might just be true. So, again, I hope you guys enjoyed listening to this story, especially if you haven't heard it yet. You can go deeper into the story. Just look up 1999 Creepypasta. You can find it all kinds of places. You can watch YouTube videos on it, have it further explained, whatever you want to do. I would like to, again, say we don't have any fan stories this week. I want to have a fan story next week, guys. If you're listening on Spotify, the email address to send your fan stories is scared, sh_tless podcast at gmail.com. If you're watching on YouTube, it's the podcast at the bottom of the screen. Send me some fan stories, guys. But that's all for the podcast. I hope you guys really enjoyed watching or listening. And I hope to be with you guys again next Sunday. And be scared shitless.